Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show and the What's Next radio program on WPPN People Powered Media 106.5 FM in the city of brotherly love. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining for the podcast listeners, Ray's Latino Talk Podcast. You can check out our talk show anywhere you can download a podcast. iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify. The list goes on and on. Anywhere you download your podcast. And of course, you can always check us out on social media, on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, RAYS Podcast, on Instagram at Ray's Latino Talk. On this episode, a bonus episode of Ray's Talk Show, we're going to hear later from Sandra Cano Bravo, an activist in Arizona, about just sort of the attitudes and how people are feeling about this latest wave of anti-Latino sentiment being spewed by this president, and generally what's going on in the Grand Canyon State, I guess is one of their monikers. And we're going to hear from the hip hop philosopher himself, Mario Collazo, aka Planetary, from the hip hop crew Outerspace and Army of the Pharoahs, who's going to talk about the legacy of Nipsy Hustle, what we can do to celebrate his legacy, and of course our spring Philadelphia sports report, which I know for our Philadelphia listeners will be quite entertaining. But before we get to that, I wanted to just talk about sort of the breaking headline of today when you're listening to this early in the week of April 6th is the Secretary of Department of Human Services, Kristjen Neilson, has been, some say fired, some say resigned, but basically forced out of her role. And this is so fascinating and so disgusting on so many levels, because if you really analyze what's occurred here is that she had lost favor with the president because he felt she wasn't, quote unquote, strong enough as it related to border security. And when it came down to it, there's been reports all over the place in mainstream media outlets that essentially she would not capitulate when he requested strongly and demanded for her to shut down the border, continue to separate children, and basically more draconian, a range of more draconian human rights violations and measures, criminalizing our border, criminalizing immigrants, even if they're small children. And the reality is we have to just acknowledge the fact that he basically is firing her because she refused to break the law. And so this is what we're seeing again and again, is that, first of all, he's the biggest punk in the world, this president, because he continues to put people in a position to do his dirty work for him, whether it's in his past business dealings or in these policies that he's trying to implement purely for political gain on our southern border. And so he puts a relatively young woman in her mid-40s, a relatively young person, puts a sort of pretty face on this evilness and puts her on the front lines to potentially break the federal law. And so there's sort of this weakness and cowardice to this man. But the bottom line is that Kristjen Neilson is no hero in this story, because while she held the line as it relates to putting herself in criminal jeopardy, she had no problems when it was legal, although it was incredibly immoral, incredibly unethical to separate small children from their families, to continue to house immigrants and young people, regardless of their medical conditions, their or any other factor, literally in cages. We've seen some of these scenes. There's people being held in holding pens under highways. I mean, truly disgusting, truly un-American, truly behavior that we espoused in other countries as banana republics or backwards people, when in fact this is the kind of behavior and the kind of policies that Secretary Neilson had no problems implementing when it didn't put her in harm's way. But the moment it would potentially put her in harm's way legally, she's cutting and running. These are very difficult times. He's going to continue to try to break the law, basically, and break all sort of international standards for the treatment of refugees and immigrants. And so we're going to have to continue to be vigilant and call it for what it is. Inhumane behavior, amoral behavior. Let's not even, this is beyond immigration policy, my friends. This is about what kind of America country we want to have. What kind of democracy do we want to blatantly break the rules. If you don't have rules, you don't have a country. Isn't that what the Republicans always say? Isn't this all about isn't this whole argument about rules, about sticking to the rules? Well, this man is not submitting his taxes or responding to congressional subpoenas. Well, those are the rules. So what is this really about? This is about rules. It's about something else, about keeping some order and scoring political points on the psyches of these young people and these poor working people that virtually none of them wish no harm on anybody. Let's talk to Mario Collazo, the hip-hop philosopher, get his philosophies on the legacy of Nipsey Hustle. Talk a little Philadelphia sports, always a great topic, and I'll be back on Ray's Talk Show. You know, when topics impact the hip-hop world, and of course, it's spring, so Philly sports is heating up. I had to bring on my hip-hop philosopher and literally my baby brother, Mario Collazo, but you hip-hop heads around the world know him as Planetary from Outerspace in the Army of the Pharoahs crew. Planetary, welcome back to the show, brother.
What up, what up, what up?
I know, a lot going on here. So we're going to get to the fun stuff in a second. NBA playoffs are around the corner. The Phillies are swinging some lumber. But I did want to bring my brother Mario on because him being someone, a very big part of the hip-hop community in Philadelphia, and really throughout the Ray's Talk Show family, we had a real sad loss last week and wanted to get your thoughts about it. So let's start here about the tragic death of Nipsey Hustle. Mario, can you just share with people who he was and how you first encountered his music over the years?
Well, Nipsey's been around a lot longer than I think people might even know because he was, in the underground scene for a long time, over 10 years. So, I know that at first I kind of didn't give him the time of day at first. And then I remember there was a guy, Tone, that used to tell me, yo, you sleeping on him. And I just kind of whatever, there's so many artists. He passed me. But then he did an album or project called Mailbox Money. And I remember I heard something, just on the whim. I said, man, what is this? And it was Nipsey. And I said, well, dang. So then I listened to the whole project, and then I started to go back to all his older stuff, and that's when I became a fan on that. I still listen to that. I was listening to that today. Then he did that Victory Lap album recently that was nominated for a Grammy. He was just on his way. It's a shame. He's been around for a while. He did he opened tours for Game, and he paid his dues to get where he was at.
Yeah, when we were coming up, the hip hop was very much categorized by region. So for you youngins out there, it was, hip hop was essentially a local genre for the first several years, basically New Yorkers. And the only distinction was Bronx versus Queens versus Long Island versus, whatever, Harlem. And then, other artists, from Philly and other places started popping up. And then the West Coast just became a whole separate industry almost with NWA and, 1 Degree Removed from Dre and DJ Quick and all these people and Ice-T and all those folks. But Nipsey, I don't know. I don't follow it the way you do, but Nipsey kind of didn't fit into those categories from what I can tell. He really had a fan base that kind of went beyond the old school East Coast, West Coast vibe.
Yeah, I think that comes from, he kind of did what Game did, where he was a West Coast dude. He was, straight gangster, West Coast style as a person, the way he came off. But he rapped like an East Coast dude, and he rapped over East Coast sounding beats, that kind of style. He didn't really do the whole, West Coast sound. And I think that's why everybody embraced him, because he I wouldn't say he could rap as good as Game, lyrically, but he had a message. He was kind of more like a Pac, I would say. He was more like a Tupac. But what I like more about Nipsey, I always get killed for the Tupac, but what I like more about Nipsey is that he had the message, he had the beats, he had the flow, that he didn't try to he's from the West Coast, and he didn't try to, he didn't overdo the West Coast thing, because it wasn't what he wanted. He was being himself. He didn't try to he repped his whole thing. He repped West Coast hard, but I feel like Pop, Pop was the East Coast guy, went West Coast, and then tried to sound West Coast. You know, like he just all of a sudden had an accent. You know, like all that kind of stuff. But Nipsey, I think that's why he got embraced so quickly, just because all the big guys, you know, all the mainstream guys embraced him fast. The Puffy, you know, the Fat Joes, everybody. I don't think there was a rapper that didn't like him ever. You know, like everybody was co-signing him. You know, so
yeah, I remember like
that was him more as a person too. It seemed like he was a great dude. You know, everybody liked him.
Yeah, no, and when I saw the Breakfast Club interview, which a lot of people are watching, you know, kind of his last big public interview, I thought about how he kind of just seemed real relatable as like an East Coast cat with his beard and like his physical style. He didn't like he didn't come off like an obvious West Coast person. And I remember them talking about the Crip and Blood stuff on that interview. And I'm like, wow, I can't even forget that even exists sometimes. But, you know, like just the fact that he was able, even locally, he's able to transcend that. And he meant so much to the world.
He was trying to break that whole thing up. You know, he was, you know, the same way Snoop and Game were doing, where they were trying to, you know, show that there can be unity in that, you know. And he was actually, I mean, I know everybody's heard this on the news, but he was actually supposed to link up with LAPD the day after he got killed to try to talk about ways of, you know, trying to end the gun violence. He had like a scheduled meeting the next day. And didn't get to it, you know.
How ironic. So Mario, when you're listening to Planetary from the Army of the Pharoahs crew talking about the tragic death of Nipsey Hustle, where he fit into the hip hop landscape, and now I wanted to ask you, Mario, about when you heard about this tragic murder, where were you, and what's been on your mind since?
And you know, it was one of those things where, and this is gonna sound crazy, but I feel like when Pun died, when Pop died, when Big died, when all those guys died, I felt like we knew it was going to happen in a way. Like, you knew the Pac and Big thing got out of hand. You knew that Pun's health was out of hand. And outside of, like, the Big L thing, like, this one, like, I think this one, like, affected, I felt like I knew him, kind of, you know? It had, like, I guess, like you were saying, because he's so relatable to people. And he was so hot right now and doing so many things right now. It was like, man, I think somebody so positive was doing so much for the neighborhood. You didn't really see that with the Bigs and the Pocs and all that. You didn't see like so much in the neighborhood, like walking around. You know, you didn't see that they were like superstars. He didn't really play the superstar role. I mean, he might not have been there, but I mean, he was nominated for a Grammy. So, I mean, he was somebody, you know. I think he wasn't at that point yet, but I don't know. I know that like it affected a lot. It was shocking, man. I got it from a group chat text. Like, yo, did Nipsey get shot? I'm like, no way, you know. And then then the internet just flooded like within minutes, and I was just like, wow, this really happened, you know. And then when they said, you know, there was videos out fast, and you saw like him on the ground. I'm like, there's no way he makes this. He makes it out of that, you know.
Yeah, and
hip hop took a big loss with that.
Big time.
The same way they did with the Puns and the, you know, with the Big and the Pop. Like, I think it took just as big of a hit than it did with that, because it's, you know, it's like there's very few big rappers being uplifting like he was and being so influential. Like, you know, like what's Meek Mill going to be next? You know, just because he's doing good things. It was tragic. It was horrible. It's horrible, you know. And it was like, damn, man. Just when you think, you know, it hits a certain level, and it's like, nope, you know. This just proves everybody, you know. This just makes people still want to talk about how hip hop does so much wrong for people, which it's not the music. That was some personal beef, you know. But it's like,
well, it's actually people, and in this case, it's actually people rejecting hip hop's message. Nipsey's message wasn't about this, right? So it's like people resisting the direction hip hop's going. I mean, Meek Mill, Jay-Z, Nipsey, you know, there's a lot of positivity in the celebrity class of even that elite class of hip hop nowadays that people, I mean, quite honestly, unless you're in it, you don't, you know, you stereotype it and you're not really acknowledging what I see and what I think most of us see in the hip hop community. So where do we go from here, Planet? Because I think in Philly, especially, you're listening to WPPMLP 106.5 FM, this interview, like I think a lot of people are sad because this past weekend, several people got shot, 1 or 2 got murdered. And you saw a lot of stuff on Facebook like, where's it going to end? Why we keep doing this to ourselves? And, you know, we're even losing good people like Nipsey that were investing in these neighborhoods, supporting black businesses, supporting, you know, black relationships, you know, his positive role as a father and a husband to Lauren Loud at London, you know. So I guess from a hip hop activist perspective, like, what do we do now? Because if Nipsey, who was doing all the right things and had overcome so much, he falls, I think a lot of people, you know, it like you said, it's been a real big hit. So what do we go from here?
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard because they feel like, you know, like, damn, you know, I was getting to the point and now they kill him. Like, oh, what the hell is the point then, you know? But, like, you know, like I posted something today on my Facebook that was interesting. I don't know if you saw it. There's a school in Newark, a high school, where they're opening up on Friday nights and Saturday nights for the kids in the neighborhood to keep them off the street. They're giving them food. They let them play ball. They got pool tables. They got, you know, they got a studio where they can record songs. They got all these opportunities for kids. And there was interviews with kids like, yeah, I'm not trying to. There's nothing else out there except getting killed, you know, or being in the game and all that. And I think if there's more of that hit me hard because I'm like, man, why did nobody ever think of doing that? And and the donations are coming from alumni and like the local businesses and stuff like that. And the principal of that school put a lot of it in play. And I'm like, you know, stuff like that where we could get these kids off the street, you know, and have them doing other things because there's people that just go outside and that's all there is in front of them. And that's just the reality of it. You can't expect there to be drug dealers on the corners of a whole kid's entire life and him not be tempted to be part of it. I don't understand. It's not like this crazy concept that the kids do what they see. That's what every kid does. It's just the kids that don't have that in front of them don't see it. So they don't get into it for the most part. Not saying that they don't, but of course it's more likely the kids that live on the block with all the drugs, that's the ones that are going to start selling the drugs because they don't know anything.
No, and it's just, and I did see that post, and it's just like a lot of it's just like a safety mechanism. Like, I literally don't want to get hurt. Even if I'm not involved, I don't want to get killed, or I don't want to be misinterpreted, or I don't want an interaction with police just I'm walking around my neighborhood. Like, it's those are definitely the kind of things we have to focus on.
And let's say the mom might be on drugs, or the mom can't, you know, the parents are poor and the kids want to help, you know, and it's like, all right, well, then you get a guy to influence them, like, you can help, you want to do this, it takes 5 minutes, you know, and then they tease them with that, and then that's where the cycle just keeps on going and going.
You know, I was talking to, I ran into a guy the other day. I'd say he was probably African American. I'd say he's probably in mid-30s, and he was telling me about how we had this real deep conversation because he was basically like, you know, one of the ways that he can make extra money is by being a bouncer at like bars and local clubs and stuff because he's like a real big guy. But he's like, so I do it because I need the money. But he said, to be honest with you, I'm like kind of a big punk. Like, I'm not a tough guy. I don't like guns. I don't like drama. But he's like, he said, it stinks because I'm this big guy, but I'm in these situations where I'm scared half the time and it's hard to admit it to other people. So there's a lot of fear. People don't realize just because you're a young black child, especially a young black male in an urban area, like a lot of this is just trying to avoid like what happened to Nipsey, you know, and that's stress. People don't underestimate that a lot of it's just, hey, I'm just trying to go to work. I'm trying to catch a bus and it's late at night and I have no other way of getting to work and I can't afford another way. And now I'm walking around by myself and it's, you know, these are children and we have to take care of them and we got to persevere for our children and for the memory of Nipsey. The last question on Nipsey, Planetary, but if someone wants to honor him, what's a song or an album they should listen to, and how else should they honor the legacy of Nipsey Hustle?
Oh, Nipsey, I mean, if you want to go back to Nipsey, he had some mixtapes, but I mean, if you go to Mailbox Money and Victory Lap, I mean, those are two incredible albums, man. Victory Lap was his newest one. It came out last year. I did like a top 10 thing. It was in my top 5 for last year. There was a lot of good music last year. And Mailbox Money, and then from there, you know, he had some mixtapes. I think it was like the Slauson Knicks won, lost in 2, something like that. But he was nasty, man. I would give, we'll go to mailbox money, start there, then go to victory lap.
The other thing, and then on the community side, I would recommend to people in that spirit, do make an effort to support a Black-owned business, a Latino business. You're going to do your taxes next year. Think about, can you find an African-American accountant or a Latino, dentist, or, there's ways to give back to our community. Donate. If you don't, donate to a charity, spend some time at a school, go speak to a school. There's little things you can do that can make a big difference. And you're listening to my hip hop philosopher, Planetary, aka Mario Collazo, Army of the Pharoahs, Outerspace crew. And he's got the next generation hip hop artists and his crew that we'll be talking about on a future episodes of Ray's Talk Show. And you're listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia, People Powered Media, and of course, Ray's Latino Talk Podcast. Mario, to happier news. Every time we talk, it seems like being a Philly sports fan is better and better and better. Now we got the king of swag, Bryce Harper, powering the Phils to a hot start. The Sixers are about to start their playoff run. AI, Wentz, Harper, they're all going to each other's games. They're wearing each other's jerseys. They're shouting each other out on Twitter. I mean, it's just a love fest here in Philly, Mario.
Everybody loves Philadelphia, man. Like the food here, it's making everybody treat each other better too. It seems like, it's I'm excited for baseball, and I'm excited for the Sixers. They locked in the 3rd spot last night without even playing, so that's these last 2 games. I don't think any starters are going to play, but I'm ready. I think we're going to play Brooklyn. I think we beat them in 5. I just like the whole vibe. I like the whole handshake for everybody when they come in off the plate. For the Phillies, I like the wave from second base that they do to the dugout. I just like everything they're doing. It's all bad. That's all bad. And when you got a lineup like that, you're going to fill the seats. That's just how it is.
It's so interesting. We'll get to the Sixers in a second, but just on this Phillies thing. So for people who are not listening, for people listening don't know us personally, you probably couldn't have grown up in a family that was bigger into baseball than we did. I mean, my grandfather literally had a weekend men's hardball team, so we were bat boys and kids. We played. Mario was a much better player than I was, but I was, but my point is that, we played Stratomatic. I mean, we're talking. Our brother Michael's like a baseball writer on the side. I mean, we are in it. I think we know the game pretty well. And the thing that that I think was underestimated was all the stuff we did besides Harper. I kind of slept on how good. I knew that Realmuto and McCutchen were good, but I think they brought a whole other level of swag that Bryce is building on too. So that's part of it. But and I even said this down the end. If you get into the sort of nitty-gritty baseball nerd stuff, statistically, Harper isn't as good as a Trout or even maybe as good as Machado that we were also debating. But you can't measure swag. And the persona this guy's got, I mean, I think this is the biggest personality we've had in Philly since AI. I mean, the guy's got swag for days, doesn't he, Mario?
And it's a thing I don't think I remember seeing him with before. I think the city helps him amplify his swag more.
Absolutely. That's a good point.
At the Nats, I don't remember him being this, great dude,
Well, I've heard people talk about this, that they think, I've even heard Washington sports writers talk about this, that the Nationals in the city kind of constricted him. It's DC, it's politics. It's a very prim and proper kind of fan base, lobbyists and people, it's DC. It's a different vibe. In Philly, I think you're right. I think the city's allowing him to kind of be free and be himself. And he's also a big sports fan. None of this is fake. I think he's into hanging out with AI. I think he loves basketball, loves going to the games, interacting with other guys. I don't think he had that with John Wall and the Redskins. You know what I mean? I just think he's.
No. I don't got to explain that. We all know the difference between Philly and all these other places when it comes to sports. If we love you, we're gonna love you really hard, like we're family. And that's just how it works here. And people know that, and when somebody's willing to be here and know the challenge that they got to hurdle being here, you can't mess up. He already got bleed one. You'll get food.
And he loved it. And he loved it.
You make him, he loved it. It's motivation. So you gotta be a certain type of player to be able to accept that. You know, and I think that's why Bryce was a better decision than Machado. Because Machado, he is who he is. He's a great ball player, but I think it was the right move for everything that's coming from it. You know, and I think
question.
of all the moves we made, touching was probably the best deal, the best thing we did, the smartest thing we did, because we did that early on. Leadoff is such an important spot, you know.
Yeah. No, Metuchen. No, and he's a leader.
Nobody can. It came from out of nowhere. You know?
No, and he kind of brings it all together. Yeah, I don't know. I agree. I like the way I like the group they've brought together, and then also it's giving Hoskins. It's kind of giving him a little less pressure and more, and he's really. I think he's really maturing in front of our eyes. I think he's an all-star level player. And he showed that last year. So I think it's all coming together very nicely, very, very nicely. The Sixers.
He's got to hustle. He's got to hustle for those foul balls, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's a DH, but it is what it is. Yeah.
And he'll figure that out. You know, if you're not going to have a great glove, that's where you got to go with first base.
Exactly. Yeah, well, I mean, we lived with Ryan Howard's glove for many years in his arm. Remember how bad his arm was? But anyway, Sixers, Mario, what do you think is the key? Is this really, at the end of the day, is this going to be about Simmons? It's not going to be about the bench. Is it? I don't know what it is. About Brett Brown? Or is it about Simmons? What is it going to boil down to in that series? So we're going to get past the first round. I'm not worried about that. We're going to play the Raptors and some nail biters.
I have a couple things.
Talk to me.
That bother me with this, because there's a lot of Ben Simmons hate, and when I'm starting to see a lot of the comparison is to Giannis. Okay, and they're like, well, Giannis does it. Why can't Ben do it? But Giannis wasn't even anybody was talking about till now. He's been in the league since 2013 or something.
Yeah, it's like his 5th year, 6th year. Yeah.
So I'm like, hey man, why isn't Ben allowed to have the time to figure it out that Giannis had?
Ben was a whole lot better at his second year and first year than Giannis was. Giannis came from Greece and did not play. Remember? I mean, he was raw. Those first couple years, he was super raw.
And I'm like, why are we not allowing Ben Simmons to get the time we allowed Giannis? The whole world's allowed. Like, they're praising Giannis. He's not even a Sixer. And I'm like, yo, Ben's almost averaging a triple-double. I get that. We wish he could shoot, but the reality is that's not what it is right now. As long as he does his best at what he can do, he's the biggest piece of this puzzle, But I think my prediction is, let me go back to Brett Brown real quick. Brett Brown, he's frustrated. But we have 50 wins 2 years in a row. So I don't know what to think. It's hard because it's like, we got 50 wins. You know what I mean? How much more do you want? You want 70 wins? It's not really, how many wins do you need to get the respect as a coach? I don't know. And sometimes it's like, it's a players' league. So players, I think sometimes just don't listen. They do what they want. That's what it seems like to me. I think he plays TJ too much. I think he has problems with that. But I think the problems he has is the bench just isn't that talented, And he's trying with what he got when it comes to the bench, the second unit. But it's like, well, who does he have? That, Mike Scott, like, he's our best bench player, Mike Scott.
And Mike Scott's been good. I mean,
I like Mike Scott, but if he's our best bench player, it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
Like, you gotta fit everybody a little bit to get some rest.
And in the playoffs, the bench doesn't
figure out. I think she's going though if we don't get to the finals.
Ooh, I think I unless we get swept by Toronto, I think he'll still be here. Obviously, if we lost in the first round, he'd be gone. But I think a 7-game series, we're not home court. If Kawhi makes a play at this, at the very end, I don't think they'll get rid of him. I'll say this though, that I think a lot of it is about matchups, even with the coaches. Because my whole thing with Toronto is, yeah, Kawhi's the man. I don't take away from Toronto. I don't take away from Kawhi. But their coach is a rookie too, basically. This is his first time doing anything in the playoffs. We all know Lowry. I know that's our homie from Cardinal Doherty, but Lowry's always been a choker in the playoffs. So, okay, could Kawhi take over at the end? He could, but, I worry more about the Celtics, to be honest with you, than the Bucks or the Raptors because of the coaching matchup. and they're deep. You know, they're just a bad matchup for us with their style and the kind of players that they have. But
if we could somehow, I mean, if you think about it, we play the Rockets and the Warriors better than we play.
Oh, absolutely. We play the West. Yeah, we play the Western Conference better than the Celtics. Yep.
We can find a way. It's a possibility, you know. And I'm like, I don't think we'll see the Celtics. I think the Celtics are going to lose fast. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, a couple of the guys got hurt yesterday. They've kind of quit on for some reason. Kawhi. I mean, Kyle. I mean, what's his name? Kyrie. He's a weird guy. That's something's wrong there. They got a lot of talent, but they just don't get it together. But so you think you feel good about the Sixers? You think they're in the hunt here?
I think we'll beat Brooklyn in 5, and I think we'll have to. At that point, we would have to probably beat the Bucks.
No, Toronto. That's what I'm saying. What's Toronto ever done in the playoffs? You know, that's what I'm saying. I think it's a 50-50. I think we're right there. Anything could happen. You listen to Planetary, Mario Collazo.
You never know.
Absolutely. On Ray's talk.
Jimmy Butler's on ice, and I think he's ready to come out of his cage and be a bulldog.
Oh, I agree. As we
people, back is tight. He's not there. I'm like, he's just the sister calm before the storm. He knows why he's here. He's only here for this.
Yep. That's very true.
You're here for this part of the year. The rest was like, just keep it cool, and then when it comes down to it, just do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
No question.
You know, Tobias has been off, but I think as long as like everybody's on, you know, Tobias will be fine. You know?
Absolutely. Before we wrap up this sports segment here on Ray's Latino Talk podcast and the What's Next radio show on WPPMLP Philadelphia 106.5 FM. Shout out to our homie Aaron McKee, the new head coach at Temple. We're huge Temple fans.
He's gonna bring that back.
No doubt. So this is a 365 conversation. What else is on your mind, Planetary? You want to share with our fans locally in Philly and throughout the world listening to this podcast?
I mean, we gotta do better as a people. We gotta teach these kids the right way. You know, I think every day if you can find a kid that seems like he might be confused, just talk, you know, drop a gem on him. Give him something positive to think about for the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes after you see him. I see kids that always look like something's wrong, and I know you're not supposed to just walk up to strangers that don't, you know. If there's a situation that you think you can help a kid, just help them real fast, you know, because a lot of these kids are getting no attention, and nobody telling them that they're good and they're special and all that kind of stuff, and that's what leads to all this negativity. So just help. We got to help these kids, man, because anything that happens from here on is our fault.
And let me tell you, and I agree with that. And I would just add, even kids you think are stable or have it together, and you know, I'm amazed moving around this world where whether the college students or people that come from what we consider stable families, there's just a lot of confusion with these young people. They're seeing a lot of things, whether social media or in person with their friends and family, that they're going through stuff that, you know, we got to support everybody. So very well said, Planetary. We'll see each other soon. And you know, we got to get you in studio one of these days. Get you down to the, you know, because I know you know about them recording studios. So that's your comfort zone right there.
Oh, let's get it. I'm up on that.
Thank you, my little brother Mario Collazo, aka Planetary, from the hip hop group Outerspace and the Army of the Pharoahs hip hop crew. People are always amazed. I travel all over the country. I talk to people of various age groups, various demographics. And when I mention that I'm associated with the Army of the Pharoahs crew, Outerspace, Planetary, our man Vinny Paz from Jedi Mind Tricks, they're always incredulous on that. And so it's true. We're very proud of our family connection and all those wonderful guys, 7L Esoteric, you know, all of our homies in that posse and a good group of people. Most importantly, besides being artists that have impacted people all over the world, my brother's traveled to all over Europe and Australia and all over the United States and the Americas, spreading his message through music. And we have some great friends all over the world because of that. So much respect to our homies out in the hip-hop world. And so before we get to our conversation with Sandra Cano Bravo, wanted to let people know that, again, this is sort of, in a sense, I owed you this episode because I wasn't able to get to the studio late last week. So I wanted to get this episode in, so we had an addition for the WBPM LP family at 106.5 FM, but also wanted to make sure that We stuck to our compromiso to give you weekly content. And so we will have later this week our live show. So if you're friends with me on Facebook Live at Rafael Collazo, you can check out or just check us out on Facebook, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, 8 en la noche en Puerto Rico. We'll have our live show on Facebook live from the WPPM studios, and we'll be featuring my guest co-host, Dionelis Reyes. Dionelis is a thought leader around issues of gaslighting and sort of personal relationships and these interpersonal dynamics. And so she's agreed to come back to the show. She was a great guest a few weeks ago. I encourage y'all to check out that episode. We discussed gaslighting in depth, and she's going to come back to host the show. So check me out. I'll be back. You're listening to this Tuesday morning or Wednesday night. You get a double dip of the Race Talk Show and the What's Next radio show experience here on WPPM LP Philadelphia. And wanted to, before we get to our conversation with Sandra Cano Bravo, an Arizona activist, to kind of catch up about how people are feeling down in Arizona around these issues, I wanted to just briefly discuss, we're going to get more in depth on this, sort of discussing the dynamics young women and women are dealing with as it relates to sort of this Joe Biden issue. We'll get more into depth with Dionelis about it, but I did want to quickly note it because I haven't had a chance to be on air since that broke. Lucy Flores, a former member of the Nevada Assembly and former candidate for lieutenant governor of Nevada, and someone who I've met and associated with a little bit over the years, basically shared her story of having I think safe to say, a very uncomfortable moment, is how more or less she couched it, in some sense of feeling a bit violated, with a moment behind stage before a campaign event where basically at the time Vice President Biden, came up from behind, grabbed her on her shoulders and smelled her hair and kissed her on the back of the head. Now, she's not couching this as sexual assault or rape or anything like, sort of anything that goes into those thresholds. And so, I think it's on, first of all, unfair. People are couching it and sort of many people are sort of doubting her intentions. I mean, again, she's not saying anything other than what she feels like it was an uncomfortable moment. And so, where she was touched and it was unwanted. And so, now you can, if you want to debate her intentions on the timing, that's certainly up to you to do that. She is known to be a Bernie Sanders supporter. And in fact, I know for a fact that Bernie Sanders, when she ran for Congress a few years ago, was able to secure her quite a bit of money. So there is a relationship there. But the bottom line is that, Lucy has a right to share her story. We have a right to understand it and filter it in this context, which is, he's someone from another generation. He's someone who Vice President Biden's a touchy-feely guy, sort of a warm Irishman. And there's a lot. So that's all fair to talk about how this could be a teaching moment, how this could be, open up a discussion. I don't think most people, very few people are actually calling him not to run for president. But it is, and we'll talk more about this Thursday, it is sort of telling how he's responding to this. But I think the bottom line is that we have to put into context that, while there may be many women or maybe many people that felt comfortable with that level of confianza, Lucy Flores or any woman, and there's been others that have come out with similar stories, have every right to feel the other way and say, hey, that was not wanted. I don't know him. I don't have a confianza with him. And the fact that the media has been sort of so critical of Latina from the West Coast who's a millennial who didn't come from sort of the Acela corridor background, and that level of privilege is sort of getting being more scrutinized. I find that not coincidental. And so we'll talk about this more on the show with Dionelis, but the bottom line is, and we'll get into this more on the show, but the bottom line is that if I went up to Dionelis or any of my co-hosts, Shashira Rivera, my executive director, Vanessa Ramia Graber, any of these strong women, any of these women who I respect and collaborate with, and I think they feel the same about me, if I, out of the blue, in a work setting, in a professional setting, went up to them, put my hands on their shoulders, breathed into their hair, and then kissed them on the back of the head, first of all, I'd probably get kicked. Probably there would be a very, very vociferous response. But I think it'd be pretty clear that they wouldn't feel comfortable with that, and that would be well within their right to feel that way. So we need to keep that conversation, be real about it. Let's talk to Sandra Cano Bravo from Arizona, see what's happening with Arizona. I'll come back to wrap up this edition of Race Talk Show. Welcome back to the What's Next radio show on WPPM LP Philadelphia, 106.5 FM, and of course, Ray's Latino Talk podcast. You know, in these crazy times, I like to check in with our activists, our voices around the country. And I just came across a new friend to the show who not only is a longtime activist and broadcaster in her part of the country, but also a new podcaster. So I wanted to bring her onto the show to talk about, she's very much living in ground zero of many of the issues that we're dealing with. So I wanted to introduce a new friend to the podcast, Sandra Cano Bravo from the Bravo Report. Sandra, welcome to Ray's Talk Show.
Hola, Rafael. ¿Cómo estás? Muchísimas gracias. Thank you for the opportunity. We have a lot to talk about. Gosh, where do we start?
I tell you, and you know, Sandra is from one of my favorite parts of the country, Phoenix, Arizona. You know, I tease all my friends that are from, of course, she's from the Valley of the Sun. And I tease all my friends that live in all the different valleys. You know, of course, we have our friends in South Texas in the Valley, as my Rio Grande, our friends down in McAllen, our friends in South Texas like to refer themselves as the Valley. And of course, our friends in Central California, you know, that big valley, you know, though, is the breadbasket of America. But we all know that the Valley of the Sun is the real valley of this country. So, Sandra, welcome to the show. And, you know, let's just start again. We're taking the temperature of our leaders around the country. Of course, it's being Women's History Month. Definitely want to tap into the wisdom of our Latina leaders. So, I mean, Sandra, where do we start here? I mean, what's on your mind? I know you and I had a real deep conversation last night around how we feel like the family separation crisis is getting underreported in the news. And I know that's something that's very concerning to you.
It is. It's very concerning. And just a little bit about me. You know, I've been an activist here in the Phoenix area for a long, long time. I was the DJ at Radio Campesina, the Cesar Chavez radio station here in the Phoenix metro area. And, you know, Phoenix is the fifth largest city in the nation. And of course, it's the epicenter of anti-immigration sentiments. You know, we had Jan Brewer and Sheriff Arpaio and all that good stuff, if you can call it that. And yesterday we did have a special election, Rafael. Thank you for asking. Where Kate Gallego won for mayor of Phoenix. Of course, she's replacing Greg Stanton because he won, the election. He won as a representative in the last November election. So, you know, we're moving ahead. But the family separation is very important, and we need to keep a focus on it and not let the media, you know, in the day of where every day there's breaking news, you know, in reference to the most corrupt administration we've had in our lifetime, we have to keep a focus on the family separation. It's atrocious. It's an atrocity. I just can't believe that we have babies in cages and we're ripping kids from their mothers, you know, from the arms of their mothers and their parents, and that's very concerning. It should be concerning to all of us, a toda la raza, because you know, if it's happening to us, it can happen to another, segment of the population. History has taught us that when they demonize one section of the population, guess who's next? You might be next. So we all need to, gather and we need to mobilize and we need to be outraged. And that's what I'm concerned about, that I the lack of outrage out there. Could it be because they're brown children that are being caged? Why is that? We need to ask those very important questions, and we need to hold representatives accountable. Our political representatives, we need to hold them accountable. Why is this happening? And you know, in a few weeks, I am going to be down there in the El Paso area, so I'll be reporting on what's happening down there. And we just need to mobilize, Rafael. I don't know how else to put it. I'm outraged. And a lot of people say, "Oh, Obama used to do that." No, Obama was not separating families. Yes, he was very stringent on deporting criminality, the section of the criminality, but he was not separating families. In fact, he introduced DAPA and DACA. So let's be clear here. Let's entertain facts. Facts are being attacked, during this time. So we need to speak facts. We need to speak truth to power. because if we're educated on what's going on, then we can better address it. And I'm outraged. I can talk about this all day long, Rafael. I'm just outraged. I live in Phoenix, Arizona,
Yeah,
next
no,
border,
I
and
hear the passion.
thank God we're
And
turning Arizona around. I think pretty soon it's going to be a blue state. It's been a red state for a long time.
well, we're
So
definitely,
we just need to
yeah,
mobilize. We need to
yeah. No, you're right
engage. We
about
need
that.
to
Well,
reach out to
yeah,
our
well,
representatives, and we need to call them and hold them accountable. Talk to your neighbors. Make a phone call to one of your representatives. Know who your representatives are. Register people to vote. Speak to your relatives. Speak to your neighbors. Get out there, mobilize, because this cannot be happening in 2019 where we're caging children. They're violating the asylum laws, the country's asylum laws. You have a right to seek asylum in this country, to go into the port of entry and seek asylum. And they're denying these people that right. So, where do I end, Rafael? You tell me.
well, this is where we begin, and I think there's so much to unpack in your initial conversation. We're talking to
Rafael?
Sandra Cano Bravo from the Bravo Report here on Ray's Talk Show, and I think there's a couple of things. Yes, can you hear me? You cannot hear me.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I wasn't
Hello,
hearing you for a while.
hello, can you hear me? Okay, so where do we begin? I think it's where this campaign began, right? So in 2015. President Trump, at that point, candidate Trump, was very clear about what his agenda was to demonize the Latino community, criminalize the Latino community. And so, now on some level, we can't be surprised about what's taking place, right? So, there was a lot of rhetoric that was happening throughout the campaign. Then once he won, around his supporters or people that just weren't totally turned off by him, saying, well, that's just talk. That's not really going to happen to people. That's not people. Latinos really going to get hurt like that. We're not going to be supportive of those kind of things. That's not really going to happen. And then on the flip side, when people like you and I, Sandra, were saying, this is how Nazism started. This is how every one of these totalitarian movements of genocide started. People said, oh, you're exaggerators. Well, were we? I guess we weren't, because not only have we allowed literally 3 children to die in federal authorities' custody, thousands imprisoned, basically for what, right? I mean, crossing an imaginary line. But we've also seen negligence in places like Puerto Rico, all U.S. citizens, by the way. And there's certainly thousands of people. You can debate hundreds, you can debate thousands, but certainly people who passed away unnecessarily if there had been inadequate, even a sort of average response to the hurricane. And so, that is where we need to begin, because that attitude needs to be held accountable. I think the bigger question, which I'd like to approach it, Sanjay, if you have any thoughts about it, is what does the Latino community do? Because I think on some level, a lot of us are very aware of this. This weighs on our minds on various degrees. I think some of us, frankly, who maybe aren't as politically engaged or just turned off by the ugliness of our political environment, just sort of want to avoid it because either they feel like they can't do anything about it, or they just feel like it's kind of a depressing topic. But then what that leads to is that these children are still being treated this way. These families are still not together, and our people are still being demonized, whether, regardless of where we take action or not. So my question to you is, Sandra, what do you think will get us to mobilize more? Because at the end of the day, we have to respond and we have to stay vigilant, because the news cycle will continue, right? They'll just go on to the latest scandal, the latest headline, the latest bochinche. But we have to make sure that this is top of mind for everyone.
Well, he doesn't have many attributes, and I don't want this to be a Trump bashing, segment. He does have one attribute, though. He has many faults, and I can name them all. Um, he has one attribute. He is a mastermind in manipulating and using the media to manipulate, the narrative. So he is a mastermind, and he has Twitter at his hand. And you're right. People want to refrain from getting involved because it's too nasty or it's too complicated. But again, like Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And yes, this is how Nazism started. This is, there's a picture that I have in my room that has a bunch of shoes, like piles and piles of shoes of people in Germany that were waiting for the Nazis to get thrown out of power. Guess what? They didn't. They weren't thrown out of power. And a lot of people are saying, "Oh my gosh, you're exaggerating. You're comparing, Trump to Hitler." No, I'm not comparing him, but they do a lot of things that they do, and they say that, the first thing they do is they discredit the media. And what does he say every day, Rafael? Fake news. He's made this narrative of fake news. And that's the first thing they do. They want to control the narrative. They want to control the message. And that's why he attacks the media, because the media is just out there. I mean, if we didn't have the media, the First Amendment in this country, we would be pretty close to him rounding us up and putting us in concentration camps. The media and the judicial system is what's keeping him, with his hands tied. And when people say, "Oh, I'm not going to," you need to get engaged. If you want a better future for children, you need to get engaged. History is going to ask, your children are going to ask you, what did you do in the era of Trump? Did you get engaged? Did you vote? Did you go to town meetings? Engage in a conversation about it. And I just, I see people at the malls. I see people very complacent, and I don't think they're aware of what's happening. I mean, one thing that this presidency has taught us is that the presidency has too many loopholes of power that we must address and fix whenever there is another complacent Congress, because the Republicans are not going to hold this man accountable. They're not. Let's stop waiting for them to do anything. And
it does bring up, it does bring up a lot of constitutional questions around sort of the power of presidency. And, presidential scholars have been noting a lot that over the last several decades, since World War II and Vietnam, that they're, and both parties have been sort of slowly sort of been complicit in giving the president more powers. And now we finally are getting some pushback, right, with this emergent, this sort of border emergency. And even the Republicans are like, I don't know about this. I mean, you're not, besides it being the whole thing being ridiculous on its surface, you're not a king here. So even some Republicans are starting slowly to wake up to it. And
to me can you believe that in 2019, when we have, the internet and we have the social media, that we are still questioning why he basically used the military. He sent the military to the border on a fake pretense, on a fake national emergency about this caravan. How many caravans?
All those people lost their Thanksgivings. You remember that? They lost their holidays. And by the way, he could get them to the border real quick, but he couldn't get them to Puerto Rico. He couldn't get resources.
And he shuts them down. He goes, wait a minute. Excuse me. And he shuts them down. No, excuse me. No, sir. I beg your pardon. No excuse. Answer the question. Why are you lying? And then they tiptoe around calling him a liar. He is lying to the American public. He lied about the national emergency, to the November election for political reasons. He's been using us, the Hispanics, our communities, for political expediency. He did it from the first day he went down the escalators calling Mexicans rapists and criminals. So where does this stop? Why can't we hold this man accountable in his life? There was a report the other day, the Washington Post. He's mentioned over 9,000 lies since he took president, since he took the oath. That is appalling in itself. And nobody's raising an eyebrow. They should call him out as lies. They're not representations. And I keep hearing this word, we've never been down this road before. This is unprecedented. This is uncharted territory. My God, when is enough enough?
Thank you, Sandra Cano Bravo from Arizona. You're going to be hearing her back on the show for sure, giving us updates about what's happening out in the Southwest. No question about it. And you're listening to WPPMLP Philadelphia 106.5 FM on the FM dial here in Philadelphia. Support the Philly Can movement. And the final thing I wanted to say, this is another Stacking 20 segment. And we stack 20s here. Our presidential electoral segment is dedicated to raising funds for the Love Shouldn't Hurt movement. It's a campaign that our dear friend Cristina Vega has started here in Philadelphia. She's developing a nonprofit organization to support Latina survivors of domestic violence and domestic abuse. So we donate some resources every time a candidate puts their name on the line. So we stack another 20. Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan, kind of from the Joe Biden old school Midwest, old school labor Democrat world, even though he's a fairly young guy, has jumped into the race. Most people are yawning at this one. Tim is not the most exciting character from Youngstown, Ohio. This really, if you look at it from a policy perspective, it isn't really about policy. Tim, is one of these Democrats that fashions himself as, no, I'm not a socialist. I'm not a quote unquote flaming liberal. I'm not a coastal elite. He supports 90+% of these policies. He's signed on to Medicare for all bills. He's signed on, even though he says he's against the Green New Deal. He's supported many elements of the Green New Deal in his policies. He's got a very standard policy platform. The issue is he's arguing a branding exercise that for the Democrats to win in November of 2020, we basically need to appeal to disaffected white people in the Midwest that maybe voted for Obama, but voted for Trump, or voted for a third-party candidate in 2016. And so, look, those votes are certainly important, but there's like this continual argument and this continual preference, whether it's in the mainstream media, whether it's in this political class like Tim Ryan's and people that are supporting Joe Biden, that basically we need an acceptable white male to win. And so, and this acceptable white male would be acceptable to white people in the Midwest specifically, not even so much the suburban coastal whites, because people assume they're a little more open to electing a diverse candidate. And so, by the way, there's also very much a gender dynamic here. We have a perfectly legitimate Midwest candidate who's a senator, unlike, Congressman Tim Ryan, who nobody knows. Amy Klobuchar is a very established U.S. senator who's in the Midwest. Mayor Pete out of Indiana. We've got Midwest options. Joe Biden's kind of considered sort of in that Rust Belt kind of vibe, and he's going to run. So he's really seeing an opportunity because it seems like maybe Vice President Biden's vulnerable. Who knows? He may never ever run after all. And he's seeing this is really a branding exercise. So I would be weary of anyone, especially someone that's basically arguing vote for me because I'm the white guy, who's really sort of basing his platform on identity, regardless. Mayor Pete is not running as a gay man. His momentum is coming from the ideas that he's sharing. Even someone like Beto is not necessarily, is really running on a spirit that, obviously his background is a factor, no question about it. He's certainly getting more attention than Julian Castro, by the way, who has actually a better resume to be president. But he's basically running on a vision. Running on, I'm the guy that can convince the Harley driver in Wisconsin is a pretty weak strategy. I think the bottom line is Tim Ryan has a role in the party and a voice that he needs to cultivate and he needs to build a movement around, but not for president. Ultimately, this run's going to be pretty corny, but we will support Love Shouldn't Hurt nevertheless. And we'll talk about the next person that threw his hat in the ring just before I started recording on Thursday's show, Congressman Eric Swalwell. And we'll see what you have to say about him. Thank you so much for joining Listen to Ray's Talk Show. And of course, the What's Next radio program here at WPPM Philadelphia, LP, People Powered Media. Continue to support the movement here. Send us your comments. Email us, podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. Check out the live show on Facebook Live and IG Live Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And have a wonderful week.